Welcome to the Investor Coaching Show. Here's your host, Paul Winkler.
And welcome to the Investor Coaching Show. I am Paul Winkler, talking money and investing. Usually, there are all kinds of aspects of money investing that intrigue me. It's not only the investing part, but it's also how we handle finances, how we handle things that come up in life that can create issues that will drive money decisions. You know, like sometimes you'll have situations where you have a marriage breaks up, and a lot of times it's because of financial reasons. We know that. Sometimes you have losses in your life, you know, deaths, and now you've got to deal with all kinds of financial issues that come with that, transitions that take place in life. And one of the things that those of you that follow this show know is that I decided to get a master's in marriage and family therapy, several years ago, went through that process, and I'm privileged to be able to work over the BAP Center in Hendersonville, Tennessee, and work with some really phenomenal people over there. And, it's just something I do on the side a couple days a week, and got to know a lot of the people over there. And one of the people I got to know, Lindsey Casabella, is a therapist over there at the BAP Center. And one of the things that I wanted to introduce you to her. She's been on the show before, but I want to introduce you to her in an area that she just happens to be a big expert, knows an awful lot about, and has a lot of really great stuff to talk about regarding grief. And the reality of it is that we will all go through a period in time when we lose something in life, whether it's a loved one, whether it is, there are a number of things. I mean, you can talk about all kinds of things. You can job and health and all, things like that. And I'm going to have her talk more about those things that people typically grieve over as we go through this. But Lindsey, welcome.
Thank you, Paul. It's good to be back. Thank you for having me again.
Well, I'm really looking forward to this because I think this is going to help a lot of people because it's an area that every last one of us deals with.
That's right.
So just give us a few things, throw out a few things, because you ran literally a grief group. And what were some of the things that you saw people dealing with loss-wise that they had grieving over? What were some of those things you could come up with?
Yeah. So when I ran that grief group specifically, most everyone in there was dealing with the death of a loved one.
Okay.
But since I've started my practice at the BAP Center, I'm realizing that there is an element of grief in so many different things. Of course, the loss of someone that we love, but also in divorce, the death of a marriage.
Oh, yeah.
Life transitions.
For sure. Because you have all kinds of dreams, what the marriage was going to happen. You were going to grow old together, what it was going to be like. And then all of a sudden, that is just, no.
Right. Exactly. Dreams, that in and of itself, just dreams that are you come to realize are not going to happen.
Right.
Life transitions hold an element of grief. For instance, I have a senior that's graduating this year, and I'm grieving that. I mean, I'm excited and I'm happy for the next stage, but there's some grief there.
There's an aspect. And there's also, I see sometimes, like, for example, where health has failed somebody.
Right,
and then all of a sudden now they're grieving the loss of good health and maybe even a job.
Job loss, financial stability. Yes.
And so this hits people in a lot of different areas. I think it is really the point here. Now, forever. Was it Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, I think was her first name?
That's correct.
Yeah, she was the one. And I'm going back to studies to remember this. But there were 5 stages that have always been talked about as the 5 stages of grieving. You had, let me see, anger was one. Then you moved to denial.
And
then you go to bargaining.
Right.
And then you go to depression. And then acceptance was typical model, those 5. Now, some people have added a couple on top of that. But in general, is that still a valid model? Is that still something that people use a lot? And if so, how? And do we still call them stages?
Yes, it is still a very valid model that is out there, and it is used just to help people understand grief. But, me personally, I use the model a lot in practice to help people understand these different elements of grief. But I like to refer to them as aspects of grief instead of stages, because when you give someone, here are the stages of grief, it paints this picture that I'm going to go through this stage, into this, and then when I get to acceptance, then I've arrived. And that's just
great
not
point.
So.
No, so true, because it's like, okay, I've graduated, and then if you go back at all, you've regressed,
right?
And that makes you look bad, like there's something really wrong with you.
Something's wrong with you. That's right.
Yeah,
That's right.
You're not doing this right.
That's right.
You went back to anger or whatever.
Yes, because you can move in and out of these aspects of grief. There's no right or wrong way to be doing grief.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And, the thing that I think of is, well, let's walk through the various aspects and what they are and how they show up. Like when we're talking about anger, for example, angry at who or what? I mean, what would we say?
Yeah, I think, you may go through being angry at God. Why did you allow this to happen?
Oh, yeah.
I think sometimes you go through maybe being angry at yourself. If only I would have done this differently.
Yeah.
Or if I would have,
If I hadn't told him to go to the grocery store at this particular time, that accident wouldn't have happened.
Right. And sometimes you even find yourself angry at the person who died.
Yeah.
Or what happened. And that's okay, because that's just how we process the anger.
Right. So why anger? What is it? Is it something about, does it give us a sense of control that we could have had more control? I think that to me is where the rubber meets the road, is we all desire control in our lives.
Right.
So we give ourselves the false impression that we really do have control, is kind of where my brain goes on that.
Right.
That makes some sense?
It does.
Okay. So to me, that's anger, and you can keep coming back to it. It's something that isn't just happens once and it's over. You can keep coming back to it from time to time.
That's right. And sometimes I think maybe you go back and forth between bargaining, which is another aspect of grief, and anger.
Yeah, and bargaining. You talk about that. So bargaining. What is that? I mean, what are you talking about when you're bargaining? You're bargaining with God and saying, God, if you'll just bring this person back.
Right. Or, if, and then sometimes it's the if only questions that I kind of had previously mentioned. If only I would have done this, if I could go back.
Oh, so that's part of bargaining.
Right,
Okay.
right. So you may experience bargaining and then the anger, because we can't do that.
Interesting.
And so a lot of times people will kind of isolate back and forth between those two elements.
So it's interesting when you mention this. What hits my mind, Lindsey, is that the idea of getting angry, sometimes it's because of how people approach us when you're going through a loss. I've heard stuff like this. People go, well, Paul, everything happens for a reason.
Right, right.
Lindsey, you're going to get over this, and you're going to be even better when you come back from it. Or, you're, something good is going to come out of this. That's something else that you hear out of people. Or, you're so strong, you're so resourceful.
Yeah.
And you hear that kind of thing, and you think, stop. You think you're helping me, but you're not.
Right.
So talk about that. What happens with people when they're hearing that from somebody else? Why is it that people do that, number one? And what is it? Why is it not helpful?
Yeah, I think grief it's just an uncomfortable subject. And I think that most people they mean well.
Right.
I think that most people, their intentions are good.
Yeah.
And so I think people want to try to make someone feel better. And so they'll try to bring the positive to it.
Yeah, and we live in a culture which is we got to solve problems.
Right.
When you're in pain, I want to solve the problem. So
That's
it is,
right.
yes, that makes sense to me.
That's right.
That would be the case. So that's, and we look at that, we go, okay, so anger, and then you have bargaining. Let's say we kind of skipped over the second one, which, talk a little bit about that, the second aspect of it. When we look at anger, it may lead to just denial. Walk through that, because you've seen this so many times. What does that look like?
Right. I think denial, I would somewhat put denial as the first stage. That one I can kind of understand because a lot of times, right after a loss.
And I may even have them backwards. It's been a while since I studied. That may be on me. But that would make sense to me because, it didn't happen. And just from a psychological standpoint, sometimes when something bad happens,
right,
we just go, no, I can't handle that, and I repress it.
Yep.
Right?
Exactly. Which I think is just part of the way that God wired us because, after a loss, there's so many emotions. And to be able to process and hold all of those at one time, it's just too much.
Yeah, it's like the movie A Few Good Men. You
Right.
can't handle the truth.
It's just too much. And so I think, in the beginning, after a loss, there's a lot of preparation for arrangements and busyness that's taken place. And so
right. It allows for the denial. That makes a ton of sense
right.
for sure.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. So those are, and then you've got depression, which is this hopelessness.
Yeah. And I would say that aspect, depression, probably from what I see, is somewhat of the longest aspect. If we're looking at it from stages.
Right.
I would say that typically people spend the majority of time in depression. And I think it's important to note that when we're talking about depression here, it's a little bit different than actual what we clinically call depression. There is a difference, and we can get into that just a little bit later.
That makes some sense. So
Right.
When we look at that, we go, okay, so it's a fear of the future. What's it going to look like? I had my future all planned out. I knew what was going to happen. Now it's a big blank space, and I put something really scary in that blank space. That whatever's going to happen, it's going to be bad, and I won't be able to handle it. And there's a hopelessness to it. And you said that we land in there longer than other. And I think that it's because of the fact that we keep coming back to it. It's not in order. We don't do this in order, but we land back there every once in a while because we have a bad day, and you can just be there for a longer period of time.
Right. Because it's the aspect of the sadness and just the longing, the missing, the longing, just the sadness.
Yeah, for sure. Sometimes people go, everything happens for a reason, and they mean well, but there is more than that. There's more than that, isn't Lindsey? What are some of the other mistakes that people make in regards to dealing with people that are grieving that you've seen?
Yeah, a couple of more statements that you hear is, well, be grateful for the time that you had with them.
Yeah.
Or you're blessed to still have this.
Yeah, it's our fix-it culture, like I was talking about earlier.
That's
We just want to fix it. We just want it to go away. Yeah, so why is that so hard?
Yeah, well, and before I get to that, I was going to say another one that we commonly use and that we hear is, we say to people, let me know if there's anything that I can do.
Okay. So why is that? Because that's interesting because you hear that all.
You hear that all the time. Let me know if there's something that I can do.
I could see saying that to somebody for sure.
That's right.
Because it's like the thoughtful thing to do. Let me know what I can do for you. Sure. Why is that an issue?
Because the chances that someone's actually going to say what they need, because they probably don't
somewhere
even
between
know.
slim and no. Oh, yeah.
That's right. They probably don't even know, because when you are in grief, sometimes you don't know. And so that actually is putting the burden on the person that's grieving.
So it's pressure because, then, this sort of makes sense to me a lot, because if you're asking me, then I'm trying to come up with something and I'm having to think about it. And I feel bad if I don't give you something because I'm robbing you of blessing, so that makes some sense. And I don't want to be that person that robs you of the ability to bless somebody else because I know that you feel that you need to. Oh, that makes a ton of sense.
Yeah.
And really thought about that way. What are other things?
Sharing our own experiences, because I know we all have a story. We all understand our story with grief.
Right.
And if we don't, we will at some point, because grief is part of life.
Right.
And so
I can top your story.
That's right. That's right.
And I don't mean that that's necessarily what's going on, but in a way, it sort of can be.
It comes across that way. And
I guess it could come across as, why aren't you getting over this? I got over it, and here's what I went through, and I got over it.
That's right. Or here's what I did. This is what I did.
Advice giving.
Unsolicited advice sometimes.
Ooh, yeah. The ultimate in grieving that, I think about Job. The book of Job.
Oh, yes.
There are things that his friends just didn't do quite right.
That's right. That's right. And we can always go to that book and learn so many lessons on.
And for those of you that don't even, so he lost his kids, he lost his family, he lost his reputation, he lost his position, he lost his property, he lost everything. And, the thing is that all his friends came around, and at first they started well. For those of you that don't know the story,
right?
They started well. They came around and they just shut up.
Yeah.
And they sat with him.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, then they started to, what did you do wrong? And that is, ooh, ouch.
Right.
Yeah, you did something wrong, which really goes into the whole, you can get really angry, but then, when that's happening, for sure.
Yeah.
So other things, you were about to come up with another one. What else?
Yeah, this one's really common too. So if you tell someone, I'm going to be there for you, be there, because so often, people will check in for a week or two, and then I get it, life gets busy, and and we just fail to check in.
Especially the first couple of weeks, you got so much going on and so many people, because you've got, the visitation, you've got the funeral, and if it's a loss of a loved one, then there's also, let's say if it's a loss of a job, all of a sudden you kind of check out and you stop checking in on the person, and they kind of feel awful because they're out and maybe they're trying to find another place to work and it's not getting better, or their health isn't getting better, and it's you almost feel like there's another reason people aren't checking with you, and it can add to the sense of loss, because now you're losing your friends too.
That's right. And that's a whole aspect that is so difficult for so many people, and that's what we call secondary losses.
Oh yeah.
Because a lot of times after someone passes away, you have secondary losses. Maybe you lose, if you were a couple, you lose couple friends.
Oh, yeah.
You lose financial stability. So there are all these other secondary losses that sometimes come from one single loss. And, people need support.
Yeah, for sure. And as you mentioned this, I'm thinking about the aspect that you talked about a little bit earlier, depression.
Right.
And when we're going through depression, what we tend to do anyway is isolate, because we don't think anybody wants to be around us because we're miserable. Why would anybody want to be around me?
Absolutely.
And one of the best things to help somebody overcome that is being around people.
Right.
Getting connected with people. But it's the last thing sometimes we want to do. Now, forcing somebody that's going through this process into being around people when they don't necessarily want to be, I'm sure you probably have some things to say about that as well.
Right. Yeah. I tell people all the time, you have to do what you're ready to do, because when you're grieving, there's more than just the emotional aspect. I mean, there's a physical aspect to grieving as well.
Mm.
So grief affects the endocrine system, the nervous system,
Mm-hmm.
your immune system. There's a lot of just exhaustion. And it also sometimes deals with maybe there's trauma surrounding the loss.
Mm-hmm.
And, sometimes people deal with some PTSD symptoms after a loss. And so you're not always able.
Right. So telling somebody, get out there and you just need to get active again.
Right.
And it may not be, there may be physical reasons that they can't do it.
That's right. And that may very well be true, because I do believe that that's part of healing.
Sure, yeah.
But someone has to do that at their own pace.
At their own pace is your point. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, this
So
is really good stuff.
Right. I always tell someone, in the beginning, when you're beginning to go to a party, or especially like at holidays, take your own car. If you feel overwhelmed, it's okay to leave.
That's a really good, that's really good, so that you can do things on your own timeline, for sure. So we've been talking about something that every last one of us goes through at some point in our lives, and our friends as well, the grieving process. You've lost something. You've lost a job. You've lost a loved one. You lost health. You've lost whatever, your dog. I mean, just there's all kinds of stuff that people grieve over. So talking a little bit about the things that people do that don't work so well. We've discussed that a little bit. Lindsey made the comment, you're just lucky you had this person as long as you did. He or she's in a better place now. I hear that kind of thing from time to time. He died doing something he loves is another one I've heard before. And, I'm supposed to feel really great about that. And you can always have another child, it's like, oh my goodness, ouch. Everything happens for a reason, you get that type of thing.
Right.
So we talked about the stuff that doesn't help a whole lot. Some of the things that maybe would be a little bit more helpful. What are some of those things, Lindsey?
Yeah. So one thing that we all want to say, how are you?
Mm-hmm.
But just simply changing that from how are you to how are you today is very powerful, because grief is different every single day.
Sure.
There again, going back to what we've already talked about, there are different aspects that show up. And so asking someone, how are you today?
Yeah. And I'm always telling people to live in day tight compartments. And even, I go into, getting a lamp on your feet is the idea that I like to point out to people. It's the next step. That's all we're given. It's the next step we got to make. So that makes a lot of sense with that.
Or even, what do you need today? And hey, maybe it looks something like this. I'm going to go run errands today. Do you feel up to riding with me?
I like that, simply because you're giving a specific thing that they don't have to think too hard.
Right.
Okay,
Exactly.
So that's very different from the last one you said. That makes a lot of sense to me. Okay.
Yeah. Be a good listener. When it comes to grief, I tell people you have to get very comfortable sometimes with silence.
So true, so uncomfortable for people to just sit there and say nothing. Like I talked about the story of Job. They sat there and said nothing for a long time.
That's right.
Which is hard, but it is exactly what people need, because you don't want the pressure of having to come up with something to fill the space. And they don't want to hear your advice, which is what you're typically inclined to just throw out there.
But sometimes silence is incredibly compassionate and empathetic. It really is.
I think a lot about the boundaries. Sometimes when you give somebody a boundary, hey, you know what? I really don't need you to tell me what to do. I just want you to hear what I've got to say. Just because sometimes what happens is the best thing you can do as a person is just be a sounding board for the other person, so that they can kind of think through what they're dealing with. And we don't think that we're helping doing that, but you really are.
Yeah, I cannot take credit for this statement, but I use it a lot. I had heard it once before on a different podcast, but grief needs a witness. And, when it comes to grief, sometimes people just need to share their story. They need to just share their story, and they need to be heard. And so just offering a listening ear, not trying to talk them out of their feelings.
Right. Don't try to fix it.
Don't try to fix it. Just be there. Check in with people. I've already kind of mentioned this, but, we have a tendency to check in for a little while. And then as life goes on, we stop kind of checking in.
Okay, so, to check in via like text message, using the technology. It's not, right. That's not.
Yeah, just pick up the phone and give someone a call. Let them know, hey, I'm thinking of you. I'm praying for you.
Isn't it funny how so it's like scary to even think about doing that. And it's almost like when you feel that fear and you do it anyway, the result is really kind of cool. How people respond. Thanks for thinking of me.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, you get this response that's overwhelmingly great.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure.
Yes.
But we avoid it. Why do we avoid it?
Yeah, exactly.
It's human behavior. We're complicated people.
Yeah.
Yes. So those are the things that are not helpful, as we've mentioned right here. Some of the things that are not helpful, things that are more helpful are those things where we're checking on people and so on and so forth. And, I think in terms of, I just think about this as we go through it. We want everything to have a silver lining. We want to fix it.
Yes.
And so often people, there is no easy fix for these types of things. People have so let's talk a little bit about time. I think so. For me, one of the things that I think about is when you're dealing with a friend that wants to fix things or wants to help, they might start to get impatient that you're still going through this process 6 months into the future,
right?
A year into the future.
Yeah.
Get over it already.
Yeah.
Is there a timeline on this, or what is your experience with that? Because you've dealt with this so much. How long?
Yeah.
And some people, and the question, are some people's time horizon shorter is a question that I have about that, than others.
Can be, but when you're talking in terms of time, there is no answer to that question because everyone's grief journey is different. And there are a lot of aspects that play into that because it could be, you have to look at the relationship, the manner of loss, and there's so many different aspects. So you cannot put a timeline on grief. As a matter of fact, grief is the other side of love. I explain it like this. It's like a two-sided coin. And if you love, you grieve. It's your grief is going to be with you. You're going to carry that with you. So there's no timeline on grieving. But I do hear this a lot in the counseling room. Clients will come in and they're really struggling with family members trying to rush them through the grieving process. And there's a real struggle with them because they feel like I should be better by now, or I should feel this way because I'm being told this, but I don't.
Right. And I've heard some people say, well, the first year is like super, super hard because you have anniversaries of everything. Have you found that to be true?
I do find that to be true, but honestly, Paul, I see a lot of people who are in their second year of grief.
Is it as intense?
Sometimes from what I see, the second year is harder for a lot of people.
Really? Is it because people are disappearing more? Is that part of it? Because I'm trying to think in terms of what can other people do to help.
Right. I think that can be a part of it for sure. I think that can be, other people have kind of moved on. And yes, life has returned to normal for a lot of other people. But for that particular person, it just hasn't. And, sometimes people will put off their grieving. Because it's I hear this often too. If I let myself grieve,
Oh, it's like a black hole that
That's
I'm
right.
not going to be able to
I
get back
feel like I'm
out
going to get
of.
stuck.
So,
Yep.
yeah, so don't go there, don't go there, don't
Right.
go there, talk yourself out of it.
But the
And
problem with that is you can't do that forever.
well, I've seen some people and they'll just start crying
Mm-hmm.
and you go and somebody might try to stifle it because they're not comfortable with it.
Right.
I'm like, oh no, let it out.
Right.
You need
Yes,
to do
you do.
this. It's part of the
Mhm.
healing process.
Yes.
To go through that for sure. So, Lindsey, let's talk a little bit about. As a counselor, what are some of the things that you do to help people through this process as a counselor working with somebody that's going through grieving, that's lost a loved one, lost a job, lost whatever?
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the things that you find yourself doing?
Yeah. First and foremost, just giving someone a safe place to tell their story, to be
Listening.
that listening ear with compassion and empathy, and to help them understand what they're going through and to help them understand just the different emotions and process the different emotions. Also, sometimes I had kind of mentioned this earlier that there are sometimes traumatic incidences surrounding
Maybe
the
it was a
loss.
car accident. Sure.
That's
Yeah,
right.
for sure.
That's right. And so sometimes we have to tease out the grief versus the trauma and work with the trauma as
Yeah.
well.
And displaced blame.
Right.
Because maybe it was a car accident and maybe the person that lost somebody was at fault.
Yeah.
Or, yeah.
And that's a good point because sometimes we're working on getting unstuck from particular emotions. An example would be guilt, just like you're saying.
Yeah, for sure.
Sometimes someone just kind of becomes stuck in a certain place. And so we're working through that.
It's hard because sometimes we forget that we live in a fallen world and there's just
Right.
bad stuff happens.
Right.
And it may be, and in the reality of it is nobody is perfect. Nobody can do anything perfectly. I mean, we're imperfect humans.
Yeah.
And therefore what happens is you could be at fault for something, but the reality of it is everybody
Right.
struggles with something or struggles with, having made mistakes and done things. And then sometimes there are bad consequences. We live in a fallen world. So that's a huge one.
That's right. And another thing that's important is, sometimes as a counselor, we're assessing for depression and anxiety and even maybe talking about is medication appropriate for this particular season. Grief comes with aspects of depression, but usually you can kind of tease out with grief. You have those moments of depression, but you're also able to kind of have moments of joy. And if you find that that is not the case, that you're never able to have moments of joy, then maybe we need to look at, is this leading into a different kind of depression?
It reminds me as you're talking about that of a model that I heard one time where somebody had a box. They said, you got a box and there's a button in there that pushes the buttons. You know the model?
Yes, I
Go
do.
ahead. Why don't you explain it to people? Go ahead.
Yes. So, one aspect that I hear a lot is this ever going to get easier? And, the answer to that is yes.
Yeah.
It is going to get easier. Can we say when? I don't know that. But I explain it like this. Sometimes I draw this out on a whiteboard. I'll draw a box and put like a button on the side and draw like a circle that touches all parts of the box. And it's touching that button. And that button is a pain button.
Yeah.
And when you first lose someone, that's just
constant.
Sitting. It's just constant. It's sitting
It's
on
like
that
a nerve.
button.
It's like a raw
That's right.
nerve. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
And over time, that ball begins to just decrease.
It shrinks.
And it shrinks.
So
and
it's not that the pain's ever totally gone.
No. But it lays off that pain button. And sometimes the box gets shaken. And that grief ball will pop up and hit that pain button.
At the most inopportune
happens.
time. Yeah,
Right.
you just never know when it's going to happen.
Right.
Okay, Lindsey. So another thing that hits me in regards to the grieving process and going through it. Sometimes you don't have a lot of time to get back into the game again or get back busy in life. And you don't have this just period of time that can go on forever where you're in this process where you're not getting out, you're not doing anything. Let's say it's a grieving of a loss of a job or something, a loss of a position or something like that. What would you say to somebody in that particular instance? How do we get going again? Because we've got to. We don't have any choice.
Right. Sometimes I pull out another model with clients called the dual process of grief. And it's really interesting because we'll draw a circle and I will put grief in one side. On the other side, we'll put kind of restorative task. And so we'll draw those things out and kind of go back and forth. And I will help them understand that sometimes we have to take on the task of grieving and feel it, but then we also have to implement other tasks to kind of move ourselves forward into that place of normalizing life again.
That really, because that's what I was going to ask. The thing that I've heard before is where you literally have a specific time of day that you spend in the grieving process.
Right.
And then you basically set an appointment with yourself almost.
That's right.
In a way. Yeah.
That's right. Because as much as you grieve, and you need to feel it, but you also need to take breaks from grieving too. You really do. You need some healthy distractions, and you need to find tasks that you can implement, such as, go to the movies, laugh, go out to dinner. And sometimes you do have to push yourself forward.
Now, another thing that I'd heard, and I'm curious what you think about this, but I've heard people say one of the things that's really super helpful is that if you're a friend of someone that's grieving a loss, have the person tell me stories about what, he or she was like, or, tell me stories about that person, help them process their life and almost honoring their life to some extent.
That's right.
And that, if that's helpful, why does that seem to be so helpful?
Well, I think it's always important to help someone to connect back to the good memories. Because in that way, we're honoring the person that we lost. Because they may not physically be here, but they lived a life. They had a birthday. They were here on holidays. And so sometimes if we can find certain rituals to honor someone, it can help us reconnect to that person in a positive way. And that can be very healing. Yeah. Very, very healing.
Yeah, for sure. And I'll just tell this one real quick personal story regarding, because I had lost both my parents in 1 year. And one of the things that I did was I actually wrote a book. And I'm sure that you tell people about writing as well.
Oh, yeah.
And what kind of things do you have to have them write? What are the things that you'll typically give them as assignments? Say, hey, go and write about this.
Yeah. So I have a couple of just sheets that I can give that are like journal entries for grief. And, anyone can just Google that. And you can find just kind of journal entries, and it'll give you topics just to sit down and journal about grief. And that can be incredibly helpful.
Yeah, that's very therapeutic writing.
It is.
Because I wrote about all the lessons that my parents taught me while they were living.
That's great.
So it was kind of thing. Well, this time just flew. Lindsey Casabella from the Babs Center, and she ran a grief group, and we didn't even get to talk about grief groups, but they can be really super helpful for people. So one of those things you can look for, just getting people around you that are going through the same thing that you are, that understand what you're going through.